So I live in Los Angeles, and I haven't had a car for about 2 years. It really does feel like you're expected to have a car. It's a very competitive place. A lot of people here are understandably focused on their image, what they project. And for some, that image is their whole job. But the image of carlessness is not the best. But it's also hard to shake more than 100 years of constant reinforcement that you need a car to get a job. You need to get a car to impress people. You need a car to take care of your family. And I also think there's a deeper, quieter belief that your car is you, that your car is the face you're presenting to the world, that it's a reflection of your place in the world. But is any of that actually true? Is the car like an inseparable part of human identity? No, of course it's not. So like I said, I haven't had a car for a good while now, and it's definitely a mark of privilege that the people around me have seemed really concerned about that. I think, for plenty of people, this is a norm, if not the norm. It's much more common. And some people see it as like a really negative thing, and they get very concerned about it. And other people, I think, are honestly just curious because they haven't personally spent any real amount of time without a car, or at least without access to somebody's car. So it's basically put me in a kind of weird position of acting like an ambassador as a spokesperson for the carless, which I'm really not qualified to be at all. But people ask questions and I do my best to answer them. There are definitely parts of not having a car that I really like. I like not having to pay for gas or the car insurance. I like not having this giant object that's just floating out there somewhere that I have to be worried about all the time, even if I can't see it in that moment. And on the flip side of that, I don't like a lot of the obvious inconveniences. I think that my world feels a little bit smaller without a car. If I want to go somewhere, even just in the city, it generally takes 2 or 3 times longer to get there by transit compared to what it would take driving. It's also really difficult to leave the city when you don't have a car, because obviously public transportation dries up very quickly. And to get into the intangibles just for a second here, I also really miss the space of the car. Do you get what I mean by that? The way that the inside of a car feels is so specific, and at least for me, is so nice. And in terms of the perception, I do get why people would feel concerned about my not having a car. I'm not oblivious to the image and the associations that carlessness usually carries in the United States and plenty of other modernized countries. I think it's generally seen as something that either happens to people who are just really struggling to get by, they don't have a lot of money. It's something that happens to people who get DUIs, and it's something that is rarely the result of a conscious choice based on really deeply held personal beliefs. And to be brutally honest, there are definitely times when I'm trying to feel a little bit better about myself, and I kind of ask, you know what, maybe I am doing this by choice. When in reality, it probably has a lot more to do with the fact that, like, we're talking like $5,000 minimum for a car that's basically in working order with more than 150,000 miles on it. That's the real reason. But hey, there's a chance that I would make that choice. There's a chance that I would decide on principle not to have a car, and especially because I've definitely been exposed to a lot of the, I don't know, what I would call like the anti-car or the urbanist movement that's really found its footing here on YouTube. And I agree with a lot of, the core tenets of that movement, but at the exact same time, for as much as I want to believe that I could live the whole rest of my life without owning a car, just on principle alone, I do still feel that pull. I can definitely still feel the motor oil sloshing around somewhere inside me, and I can't get it out. It would take a major operation. I also just really like cars, I guess. And I know that if I did have tens of thousands of dollars to buy basically whatever car I wanted, I would get one that I thought was really cool. I would continue to spend a bunch of money to maintain it, keep it up, get it repaired and all that. I would probably drive it way too much, and I would enjoy doing it. And that's even after learning some of the things that I've learned while researching for this video. But the hang-up, the reason why I don't give in to this fully and just completely commit myself to being a car person, really saving up tons of cash, making that a huge goal for my future self, is because, well, on one level, I don't think I'm that capable of trusting my feelings implicitly. Sorry, not meaning to turn this into therapy, but in this case, it's relevant because I honestly don't think that I should just trust my internal feelings, my spontaneous opinions and desires when it comes to cars. I don't know, I'm one of those people who happens to feel that there are definitely times when it's really healthy and good to just trust your feelings, trust your emotions, regardless of where they're coming from. It's, it's genuine to you, so act on them. That's your compass, go for it. I also think there are lots of times when it's maybe more important and it's maybe healthier to ask why those feelings are coming up, what's causing them, what's the likely outcome if you do act on them, and then, kind of make a slower, more practiced decision about whether or not you should really trust them. And I bring this up because I think anytime that you're having really strong feelings about not a person, not a public figure, but a product, in those situations, I think there's at least a chance that the marketing industry, which does just under a trillion dollars, real number, just under $1 trillion in revenue every single year worldwide, there's a chance that industry has been involved in some way. And I don't think that needs to be a conspiracy or anything like that. I think that's just their job. There's this saying in anthropology that I don't have a source for, and it's also been used for plenty of other things, so maybe I'll recognize it. But it's this idea that culture is to humans as water is to the fish. We become sort of nose blind or maybe brain blind to aspects of the culture that we're immersed in all the time. It really takes conscious thought to realize that something isn't just completely natural and unchangeable, but that it's something that we've made together as a people and that we can actually change it. So what I want to do with this video is to just take that idea and push it right over to the land of marketing, and more specifically, car marketing. And when it comes to cars in general, what I call indirect marketing really, really, really needs to be addressed, because especially here in the States, but also lots of other places, cars have and have had for a really long time an extremely complicated relationship with everything. So this video is my ill-fated attempt to research, understand, and then write about car marketing. And no, I don't think that I'll be calling it carketing, but I do want to. Okay, some hopefully very quick notes before we head into the meat of the video. Meat sounds unappealing in this context. Before we get to the bounce house portion of the video, something like that. Sponge cake? Sorry, I got distracted. Some notes. First up, a quick overview of the itinerary for today's video. First, I'll have a summary of car advertising, specifically a lot of the common themes of car advertising, mainly car commercials at that. I was supposed to just read through these without much commentary, but I did end up arguing them a bit, so sorry for that. Next up will be a discussion of car marketing. That just means forms of marketing that are not represented by advertisements, billboards, print ads, etc. This will also include a discussion of what I call indirect marketing. I will explain that concept in more detail when we get there. Then we'll have a big long section that just compares the messages and the implications of car marketing with the realities of owning and driving a car. Then there will be a short debrief section at the very end. This is just a chance for me to share some closing thoughts, try to collect my wits, I suppose, after a very long project, and that will bring the video to a close. I'll try to put sources on the screen when applicable. There's just too many to include all in the description, or I'll just say it in the video to point you towards a source. So that's it. Obviously, there were lots of different sources for this video in terms of the research side of things, but one in particular that I really, really wanted to point out here at the top and highlight, I guess, because I admire it a great deal. And in a way, this is a book that I think kind of inspired making this giant video in the first place. I really love it. It's a book called Carjacked with a long subtitle that you'll see here on the screen. And something I got years ago when I was basically looking for philosophy about cars and was extremely disappointed with what I found, or rather what I didn't find. And that's not exactly what Carjacked is either. It's heavily researched. It's very technical. It's very much just based in fact and looking at the way things are. It's by Catherine Lutz and Ann Lutz Fernandez. Catherine Lutz is apparently my favorite anthropologist, not something I expected to have at the ripe old age of 31, but I do, and it's her, and I think she's really great. She's written some great books. This is one of them. Like I said, research heavy, but it does sometimes delve into the more intangible stuff. Interviews with people talking about how they feel about cars, how cars are perceived, how ownership is perceived, all those wonderful things. And it's extremely powerful, I think, for helping to reframe our relationship with cars, our collective relationship with cars, and whether or not we want it to change in the future, whether it should change, and what we can do if we want it to change. This book is fantastic, and I'm hugely grateful that it gave me so much to go on for this video. The video also gets dark at times. There are some rough stats in here. There are some personal bits, that might be a little bit tough to get through, especially if you've also had really negative experiences around cars and car safety and all that stuff. So fair warning, and specifically if you have no choice but to drive all the time, as part of your job or something like that. Honestly, if you think that this video will make you really just freaked out and extremely anxious about driving all the time, it would just be too much, totally okay to step away. You didn't need my permission, but you have it anyway. You're not going to hurt my feelings or anything like that. And everyone else, just be aware of this. Sensitive subject matter and sometimes disturbing stuff along the way. Not in too much detail, but it is there. Lastly, I hope that the intro there gave you a sense for the personal component of this video, because everything that I say here is being filtered through personal perception and personal opinion. So, of course, if you find yourself disagreeing or you feel like it's drifting from the statistics or something a bit too much, that's how I like making videos. And I think it's relevant. I think the personal side is valid to this whole discussion. My personal feelings as well as your personal feelings. So feel free to share those as well. And if you disagree and you just hate it, everything that I'm saying, it's cool. Okay, I think we're ready. So now I'm going to talk for as long as I possibly can before my voice just completely gives up. Also, thank you for being here. It's been so much work. I don't want to tell you how much work this has been, but it has been a lot. And I just really appreciate you keeping me company. Take 3000. Let's go with Take 3000 for the naming of all these. I do look very bright. How's that? Okay, I look like a human there at least. Okay, I've been looking forward to talking about car ads, but also kind of dreading it. And I guess that's thematically appropriate because car marketing is full of contradictions, which is the point of this video. There's a case to be made that car commercials are the least creative of all ads in existence. But obviously that lack of creativity hasn't stopped them from working because they keep getting produced for exorbitant prices. Should I say budgets? Whatever. They're spending a lot of money to make these ads. Still, the rampant plagiarism of car ads, I'm going to call it, is staggering. At some point in history, there was a person, or maybe a small group of people, who thought, you know what would be great for a car commercial? Just show the car driving. It's simple, we'll save money. This is also basically all that car ads have been ever since that time. There really did used to be more variety, by the way. I'll show some older car commercials as evidence of that.
The 18 millionth Volkswagen made goes to... sorry, sir, your name, sir?
Oh, I just wanted who ordered the tuna whole wheat iced tea, no lemon.
Who's ready to unchain the only gas turbo 4x4 truck in America?
Because now you can get that room and ride in the first wide small car, the AMC Pacer. That may explain why half the people buying the Pacer are trading in bigger cars for it.
But now, every ad just shows a car, and the car is driving. Professional driver, closed course, done deal. All the other details are ancillary. You might see humans, they might talk, heck, they might even talk to the car because apparently voice commands are just sticking around. Do you use those? I've been in cars that had those. I've never used them. Nobody driving the car has ever used them. I don't know, but apparently the manufacturers still think that's just the bee's knees.
Show alternate routes.
The setting of the ad might be a desert with really picturesque sand dunes, or it might be an indistinct, flavorless city represented by whichever real-world city offered the best tax credits for shooting there, I guess. But just because car commercials are dull and devoid of humanity doesn't mean that they're without purpose. As always, ads are trying to elicit a response from the viewer, most often an emotional response, since, as it turns out, it's really not that hard to trigger human emotions, which is good for empathy, but bad when it comes to brands trying to get your money. Wow, the cat looks so lovely right now. I'm gonna take a picture. How nice. I've been shooting film lately, and I think the lab is maybe getting fed up with the number of cat photos, so we'll just use the phone for this one. So as a kind of warm-up exercise before we really dive in here, let's watch some clips from car commercials together. Just get a sense of the kind of tone that each one is trying to establish and how it makes you feel. Most importantly, ask yourself whether it's working.
But it's not about where we go. The fun comes from getting there.
I would like to summarize car commercial content and tactics as, hey, look at this. These commercials are just saying, look over here, again and again. The only thing that really changes is the specific aspect of the product that they want you to pay attention to, which brings us to a short list of categories that I'll be going through one by one. These are not all aspects of cars that will be featured in ads, just a sampling because the video can only be so long. I can only take so much. A lot of car commercials like to focus on safety. That shouldn't be too surprising for any of us to hear, and it also shouldn't be too surprising to hear that safety features are most likely to pop up in ads for cars that are aiming for families. And just as a quick mental check, try to remember how many times you've seen a stereotypically male sports car. Think lots of Corvettes, 911, Mustangs, things like that. How many times have those commercials mentioned anything at all about safety. I'm going to say it just doesn't happen. Those cars do still have safety features, of course, but the brands do not expect those to appeal to the stereotypically male target audience that might even want a fast car specifically because it's more dangerous to drive. I mean, if you want the full lowdown on that, you can look into the whole mystique around the Porsche, Carrera GT, I guess. It killed Paul Walker and a bunch of other people, specifically because it lacked certain modern safety features that became standard right after that. And even though all modern cars have inherited the benefits of what we might call legacy safety features, stuff like seat belts, airbags, anti-lock brakes, those are not new, and new is everything in advertising, so much so that Look How New is going to be its own section coming up soon. I'll have a more in-depth discussion of the actual real-world value of advanced safety features later on, but at the level of simple advertising, the most important thing that a safety feature can do is give the car's target audience a sense of its supposed safety. This is an exaggeration, but it almost feels like safety is just something that needs to be mentioned, just to check a box. And because ads present new safety features through extremely controlled, simulated depictions of possible scenarios, usually devoid of actual, testing statistics or any hard data, you can expect all safety features to make a positive impression within the context of a commercial. The only shot you really have at honesty is the as small as legally possible text at the bottom of the screen, which might explain some of the realities of that feature. But the overwhelming trend that I've seen in recent ads showing off safety features is that these features help to remove or maybe lessen the responsibility of the driver. I'm talking about like proximity sensors, auto stop systems, lane change warnings, etc. Now, in these commercials, the legal text will be very quick to point out that the driver is ultimately responsible for actually avoiding collisions, not hitting pedestrians, important stuff like that. But these ads are still clearly trying to alleviate the guilt of bad driving habits. Distracted driving is a huge issue, for example, and one that certain other car features actively contribute to. And these automated or semi-automated features heavily imply that they can help you out with that. And I think these same features are likely to appeal to the anxious driver. So even an incredibly responsible, incredibly safe driver might still worry about those tiny fractions of seconds when they just can't possibly perceive every possible threat, every possible problem. And those moments do exist. You can't be perfect as a driver. Well, now you've got some more help. Another pair of eyes, so to speak. But the biggest problem with such enthusiastic inclusion of tech-forward features in cars is that the typical human response to assistive and convenience technologies is that we try less hard, basically. We put in less effort because we feel like we don't need to. This is going to be a very boomery kind of example, but now that your phone can remember all of the phone numbers you will ever need, how many phone numbers do you have memorized?
And I found that the door was stuck. Eventually, I was thankful enough to see one of my neighbors, so I had her try to message my friends on Instagram because I don't know any of their phone numbers.
It's still an option. You still could do that, just like the old days, but most people don't. And of course, another big problem with the normalization of automation is the assumption that it's always going to work perfectly every time. And I'm going to side with the legal text again on this one. You still need to be trying just as hard if you want to stay safe while driving, and unfortunately, even then it might not be enough. More on that later. Ads can be really funny when they try to act like something is a thing, and they just hope you won't notice that it's actually kind of insane. In this case, it's very funny to me when car commercials show someone smiling in the car. Now, if there's like a convincing scene to go along with that, like a bunch of friends out on an epic road trip and laughing, having a great time, probably playing I Spy, then it can pass. I can believe it. But when it's just some nameless driver who's irrepressibly chuffed to be driving, I guess, then it stands out and it usually makes me laugh. As usual, I understand that it's not meant to be taken literally. We're all cynical enough not to expect ads to be realistic, despite many of them trying to convince us that they are. The smiling driver and maybe smiling passenger, who I think is typically like an implied romantic partner who's just as conventionally attractive as the conventionally attractive driver, are just an impressionistic representation of how the car company and its advertisers want you to feel when driving that very expensive car that will probably require you to take on a sizable amount of debt. If the fun overrides the fear of debt and financial disaster, they win. And admittedly, the driving experience, regardless of what kind of car you have, can definitely be a lot of fun in real life. I have a whole section on that. It'll come up soon. It's real, at least for people who have not been irreparably traumatized by cars. There's a whole section on that too. But apparently cars that are supposed to look fun to drive in the span of like a 30-second ad can't just be in some normal setting. It seems like, we end up with commercials that take place on mountains, in jungles and swamps, in the snow somewhere, and on sand dunes. There are so many sand dunes. I don't understand the sand dune fetish completely. Is that just like the most satisfying driving experience possible, and I just don't know it yet because I've never driven on giant sand dunes? Or in a more conservative approach, for more conservative models like family cars, we will see the cars in mildly exotic locales. The beach usually transmits the concept of vacation, even for those of us who are relatively close to beaches all the time. And these are trying to make the car look fun by association, not by highlighting the driving experience specifically. But honestly, every time I see a car ad trying to make a car fun, I reflexively picture all of the not fun parts of whatever experience they're showing. So if you're going to take your car off-roading, which very few people ever actually do, you still have to get there. You're still sitting at traffic lights and trying to keep your energy up, knowing the whole time that this is eating up a ton of your weekend. And that's not even getting into all the work required to get your car ready to off-road at all, which also carries a pretty big price tag.
Now before you go, make sure your vehicle has been serviced. Your tyres have to be in great shape. Now stock up on spares for everything. I'm talking about filters, hoses, fuses and fluids. Have a fully loaded toolkit on board, and don't forget emergency gear like a first aid kit, fire extinguisher, extra water and more. You'll also need a tyre pressure gauge, tyre deflator, tyre puncture repair kit, vehicle recovery tracks, an air compressor, a long-handled shovel, rated bow shackles and a snatch strap.
Or if you want to take your car on vacation, you're never having fun in the car, are you? Anyone with a family who has taken a family vacation knows that the driving part is kind of brutal, even if everyone's being really civil to each other. The hotel can be fun, the beach can be fun, the nice restaurant can be fun, but between all of it, you have those quiet, uninteresting moments in the car. And honestly, that's what I think of when I see a car taking some people on vacation in a commercial. And not just for these kinds of car commercials focusing on fun, but for all of them really. Look for traffic. Challenge yourself to find just some traffic in a car commercial. I'll be coming back to it, but here in LA, if you just want to drive at all for fun, meaning completely free of traffic and, at whatever speed you want on an interesting road, you're probably going to have to sit in some traffic just to get there in the first place. So again, the fun argument doesn't really work for me, but it continues to be a consistent theme, and I understand why, from a strategic angle anyway. Most driving isn't fun, so why not try to trick people into thinking that it is? The visual design of a car is extremely important. From a marketing perspective, it might actually be the single most important thing because it's the most visible. The visual design of a car does its job when the car is moving, when the car is at rest, when it's passing people on the highway, when it's just sitting in a parking lot. And it's very easy to communicate through visual media. Just show the car and you're done. It's communicated its look. Compare that to trying to communicate performance through an ad. You can show a car going fast, but that has very little impact when you're just watching it on a screen, so they have to supplement it with like slow motion shots of a horse running. You're supposed to look at a car and immediately get a sense for what kind of car it's supposed to be, and if you're in the target audience, it is supposed to appeal to you right away. Love at first sight. Now again, the look of a car can appeal to relatability, feeling like the design somehow matches your own personality, but the look of a car can also be aspirational, the same way that like fashion can be, or any of the thousands of other products that associate themselves with like exclusivity, wealth, and superiority. So appealing to that aspiration with the look of your car can be a tactic. It can be a tactic for cars that are actually high-end, and it can also be a tactic for more modestly priced cars that want to nudge themselves towards that category. Here's something that looks like a luxury car, but you can actually maybe afford it. Projecting personality onto a car is a collaborative cycle in the sense that brands want buyers to do it, and many buyers will do it willingly, possibly because of just the influence of marketing, and possibly because it feels natural. I mean, nothing fell. Cat seems fine. Lots of people relate to their cars on that level, and when the car is working as intended, I think it's effective. Projecting your own personality onto your car is maybe a little trickier when it's breaking down all the time. I mean, I guess you could still project in that scenario, but it would be a lot darker. It's time to move on, but I'll be returning to car relationships and car personality. For now, just keep in mind that there's always a target audience for a specific car, and that audience will always be reflected by its commercials. It doesn't define who can buy the car, it's just who the designers made the car for. Sometimes the audience is broad, and sometimes it's narrow, just like my videos. New has always been a foundational concept in advertising, as Mad Men tried to explain to us way back in season 1.
And Teddy told me the most important idea in advertising is new. Creates an itch.
Far and away from any other attribute of a product, new is always going to be appealing. It has the apparent value proposition that it will last longer than something that you're getting in used condition, which isn't a guarantee at all. And new also appeals to the selfish, possessive feelings, just the pleasure of knowing that you're the first person to handle this thing, that you can do what you want with it. And car ads don't have to try very hard to capitalize on the power of new. Every car ad in existence, at least the ones from the brands themselves, is assumed to be promoting a brand new model. Even so, car ads try to capitalize or amplify newness anyway, particularly when they're hawking a model that's actually all new, or when they feel like they've made enough changes to an existing model that they can use the term all new without blatantly lying. But really, any given model year can earn the title of new upon its initial release, and of course model naming conventions themselves really push the concept of new hard by granting model years that are actually for the next calendar year before it's actually happened. Man, that's a miserable sentence. It means that even now in late 2024, you can definitely buy a 2025 model. That's to make you feel like you're getting the newest possible one, of course. And if you jump in on a new model year as soon as it's released, then you get to feel like you have the newest one for the longest possible amount of time. And when the car stops feeling new, that's no problem for the manufacturer. In fact, it's an advantage, since by that time they're going to have another set of new models to choose from, probably with very minor changes to the previous models. New can never be obtained. We all know this. It's always temporary. Good news for brands, bad news for buyers who can't resist the pull. To wrap up this section, I want to do my own look at this, and it's not for any particular element of car commercials or even their messaging. Instead, it's about just how many car commercials there are and how frequently they impose themselves on our lives. It's just incredible. I can't think of another product that advertises so extensively and so often. Extensively isn't the right word. I guess I mean excessively. I just can't think of any other product that advertises so excessively, meaning everywhere, seemingly at all times. When trying to write this script, I planned on intentionally watching tons of car ads, and I did do that, but I almost didn't need to. If I'm watching anything that has ads, or if I'm on the internet at all, I am seeing car commercials, I'm seeing banner ads, I'm seeing little short social media clips. If I was able to look at an accurate log of how many car commercials I've seen across my entire life, it would probably make me lose my mind. And on top of car companies having plenty of cash to spend on big, fancy campaigns, there are also the local dealerships that apparently have plenty of cash to spend on really low quality commercials where somebody just kind of talks to camera about all the great deals you can get.
If you'd like to get and hooked real hard before you buy a car, come down here.
In the language of the internet, car companies spam more than any other kind of company. Feel free to nominate an industry that occupies more mind share in the advertising space, but I can't come up with any. And as I've talked about before, brands and the ad agencies that they work with clearly do not consider collective saturation and exhaustion, but they absolutely should. Part of that audience exhaustion comes from the frequency of individual ads. I think we've all had that experience of trying to get through a show, or even worse, like a TV movie, and then every single ad break includes that one commercial that you see every single time, maybe even twice in the same break.
I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking.
And the rest of the exhaustion comes from the collective long-term saturation that I've been talking about, which is only amplified by the extreme sameness of car commercials. They feel so similar that if you've seen one, you've seen all of them. And in the minds of marketing professionals who have been infected with ad brain over time, which renders them incapable of understanding the real world effects of their work or how much everybody hates them, repetition is key. In the minds of marketing people, you can never have enough repetition. But while that might sound good in like an overpriced textbook or on a whiteboard in a sterile conference room, it doesn't scan in the real world. It's borderline inhumane to subject people to the same thing over and over. In fact, I'm pretty sure that like constant repetition of certain songs has been used as a form of torture. If not, it definitely could be. And I think the same goes for advertising. I don't want to look anymore. I don't want to look at this integrated screen that's going to feel outdated a couple months from now. I don't want to look at what you think is a heart-pounding driving experience. I don't want to look at the smirking celebrities who are here just so they can afford a much nicer car than the one that they're currently advertising. And it's not even about my not wanting a car. If I did really want a car, if I was shopping around and trying to learn more about them, your ads would still be useless because they don't actually say anything. And this is what I mean when I talk about marketing as an industry without value. In the words of someone else, marketing is a bare, toothless cog spinning freely and ineffectually in the machine of society. Is there anything like blatantly offensive in the background right now? It's hard to see on the little screen. Okay, first of all, why is car marketing its own section of the video? Well, because I want to cover all the other kinds of car marketing that don't take the form of a car commercial or like a web ad. This is also my chance to talk about indirect or ambient marketing, which is one of those concepts that I'm very confident in. Like I'm sure that it exists, and I'm even sure that there's a real name for it, but I still don't know what that name is, so I'm going with my own. There's just so much more to talk about besides car commercials, and I also happen to feel that all this extra stuff is much more interesting. It has to do with those complicated relationships with cars that I mentioned way back at the start, and I'll be getting into that soon enough, but first, let's look at direct car marketing. In other words, these are forms of marketing that are paid for, or at least officially sanctioned by auto manufacturers and their in-house or out-of-house marketing teams. Let's call them out-house marketing teams. Is that good? Is that funny? Corporate sponsorship is an obvious form of direct car marketing. The company throws money at some kind of event so that the attendees or television viewers will see the logo and associate it with the event. That sponsorship can be aimed at really specific target audiences. It can be aimed at the broadest audience possible for an event with a lot of broad appeal, like, the Olympics. Or it can be focused on events that appeal more to the car fandom. Sorry for calling it a fandom. But like car shows or more obscure professional releases and time trials, even just meetups. I don't think there's so much to say about sponsorships except for this. Corporate sponsorships are also an opportunity for charity washing, which is when a brand ties itself to a feel-good event or a cause to kind of wash over or distract from the terrible things that they've done or the harm that they're currently doing. And yeah, like 150 years from now, when the United Federation of Planets is holding trials for willful environmental destruction, all of the car manufacturers, if they still exist, will be on the chopping block. They've already failed that very basic moral aptitude test, regardless of any additional terrible things they might be doing. So every auto brand should be interested in charity washing to some degree for their own interest. I'm not saying it's a good thing to do. Though, based on my experience or just observation, feel free to refute, the brands trying the hardest to be seen as the good guys are the ones that are selling lower priced vehicles. And I do think that makes some kind of sense. Like, why does Porsche need to be seen as the good guys? They're making boutique products, and surely performance is worth whatever global consequences the manufacturer and their use of their products bring about. Same with Mercedes and all the other brands with just upturned noses. In fact, I think it was a Mercedes commercial I saw the other day that starts off featuring this really flashy new EV, but within seconds, they follow it up with an IC and a hybrid model, as if to say, oh, don't worry, we still have cars that you can fill up with gas. We're not all in on this electric thing quite yet. And they're not. Nobody is really. Sorry, kind of drifting again. Sponsorships of any kind are just to maintain the visibility of the brand, and when it's charity work specifically, auto brands absolutely want the left hand to know what the right hand is doing. So cars are already ubiquitous in most parts of the developed world, but as if that wasn't enough, cars are also ubiquitous in nearly all popular movies, shows, and even music videos that are set in like the 20th or 21st centuries. Now, for anyone who's not so familiar with production, if you see any car in a movie, a show, or a music video, and it's very prominent, and if its logo is clearly visible, that's product placement. That means that the production team interfaced with representatives from the manufacturer, likely legal and PR/marketing teams, to hash out all the details of which model it was going to be, the specifics of how it was going to be portrayed, who's going to drive it, what happens to the car, will this be a bad guy car? In other words, these are not casual production decisions. You can't just throw a Chevy Suburban into your movie and hope that Chevrolet corporate is going to be cool with it. Now, don't get me wrong, car brands have like a million different reasons to approve their newest models for inclusion in a big project. It just puts eyes on your product, and you can also influence how that product is going to be showcased, reasonably guaranteeing that it's going to end up looking cool and desirable, especially to the target audience. And as Carjacked points out, it is usually the villains who drive off the edges of cliffs, while the wild driving heroes walk away with only light flesh wounds, which helps to emphasize just a fundamental sense of car safety, I think, and in my own speculation, maybe even a sense of a car's moral alignment? I know, kind of weird, but I do think it's possible. And if the movie or the show or the music video is popular, it also has the potential to immortalize the car, to ingrain it in pop culture. Plenty of cars have been granted cult or classic status, at least in part thanks to their inclusion in at least one piece of entertainment media, something that a recent VW campaign has been very eager to point out. And if the story takes place in the modern day, there are endless opportunities to feature specific models and brands without really disrupting the story. Just like the real world, most people need or want a car. Why not give the action star some totally sick ride? Why not multiple sick rides? Why not give your mild-mannered, responsible character a very reasonable and mildly stylish sedan, and then proceed to present it as awkwardly as possible? Well, I guess forget that last part.
This is a new car.
Wow, there's so many fancy buttons on your steering wheel.
That's a seat warmer.
Oh, that's even better than rockets. My butt gets very cold.
When done well, car product placement has the advantage of feeling natural, at least to the world of the movie or show or whatever it is. But even more importantly, it has the advantage of not being a car ad. When done well, it does not feel like a brand is yelling at you to pay attention to their minimally improved 5th gen model revision. Of course, they still are, that is the purpose, but it's a much less aggressive and less direct approach. Car product placement also extends into an entire genre of video games. I think the truest of car product placement in video games happens in the racing simulation games or the sim games. Stuff like Gran Turismo, Forza, Assetto Corsa, and other less popular ones, because it's now possible to scan a real-world physical car to serve as the basis for the in-game model. And of course, modern graphics tech supports extremely accurate rendering of car exteriors and interiors. The leading games in this category have taken the fetishization of their in-game cars to extremes. They have high-fidelity photo modes, for example, that let you view and capture screenshots of the car from just any angle. And there are also, I guess I would call them examination modes, where they let you see an exploded view of the car. You can zoom in wherever you want to. So-called cover cars and other notable models are also commonly involved in the promotion of their respective games, which emphasizes the direct involvement of the manufacturers even further. And while I could see other kinds of direct car marketing falling out of fashion, I just think that product placement, particularly for shows, movies, and music videos, is just too much of a win-win for auto brands and productions with inflated budgets. Even if the auto industry completely imploded, product placement would probably still be a thing for all the great period pieces reminiscing about the good old days when, sitting in traffic surrounded by toxic fumes was still the norm. This part is going to get a little wild, but this is also my only chance to say some of the out there things that I've been thinking about cars for a while. So here we go. My premise here is that in addition to all of the other ways that cars are marketed to us, the products themselves, the cars themselves, can also serve as a form of marketing. It depends on the car and the person in question, but I absolutely think that this is real, and I also think that brands are very well aware of these effects. So to start out, just take stock of your current surroundings and try to work out the distance between you and the nearest car. For me, I think it's about 30 feet, maybe 20. And unless you're in some sort of really special situation, like, stranded at a cabin in the woods or living an idyllic life in the Alps, which I would very much like to visit. I can't afford it right now. I'm going to guess that the nearest car is no more than like 100 feet away. That's around 32 meters. And no, I did not Google the conversion today. And even if my number's off, I hope that the point is clear. Most of us are close to cars or even surrounded by cars virtually at all times, even if we don't own or use one ourselves. Oh my gosh, I really do look like a 90s TV boy, just in the hair, not so much the face. Cars are such a common ingredient of modern industrialized society that we don't really have a choice in this. At least for now, I'm keeping my fingers crossed for some change. That's a significant presence, to say the least, and it also means that it's possible for cars to do some self-marketing whenever. But the presence of cars is only part of the equation. There are other inherent elements of cars that can contribute to self-marketing. And before I go any further, I will admit that car self-marketing sits right on the line of direct and indirect marketing. As I said, I think that brands are aware that this is a thing or that it can be a thing for certain people, and that's a factor in the exterior design of a given car, which is a huge part of car self-marketing. In general, shiny new cars, extremely intricate and exotic looking sports cars, and just unique looking cars, regardless of age, all excel at self-marketing. By the nature of their designs or just overall appearance, they attract attention. That's even one of the appeals of buying and driving an expensive sports car. Certain drivers really want to be stared at. They want to feel superior. Not everybody's getting those cars purely for their performance. And for certain people, any car can excel at self-marketing simply by being a car. I only started to think about car self-marketing when I didn't have one anymore. When I was still driving around all the time, I wasn't all that tempted by like the really pricey or quirky cars that I saw here in Southern California, and there are a lot of them out here. I didn't have the money for it, and the appeal wasn't too strong. It wasn't high on my list of wants. But things changed when I scrapped the old car following some very expensive and drawn out problems that I'll talk about later. I was now a person who wanted a car, any car, but didn't have one. And so any car I saw on the street made me feel envious. Every car, even like a dying Civic from the style drought of the early 2000s, was appealing. It was promoting itself and promoting the general concepts of driving and car ownership. And that is exactly what I mean when I say car self-marketing. Of course, as I already talked about, car manufacturers aren't that enthusiastic about you owning just any car. They want you to buy their cars, and they want you to buy one of the newest cars on offer. The designs of car bodies are always supposed to be appealing to somebody, though they can sometimes fail miserably in that respect. But more focused, intensive car self-marketing has emerged just in the last few years, I think, in the form of the newest wave of EVs and hybrids. And I don't think this is just me being blinded by the present either, though you can feel free to check me on that. The new EVs and hybrids, just from a range of brands operating in completely different price brackets, are trying so hard to be noticed. They really are trying to look. It's the kid at high school who wears a suit one day just to see what happens. They really are trying to look different or especially futuristic, and that is reflected in their commercials as well. This one in particular really made me laugh for its bluntness, obviously, but also because conceptions of the future that assume the persistence of modern-day personal vehicles as like the main form of transportation is just so thoroughly car-brained. Is that a phrase yet? Probably. Kia, I think, has been the standout with this trend, not because they're doing like a really great job of it, but because they are clearly putting so many of their chips on this future vibe via their total rebranding. That also resulted in this logo that I will always see as a K and a backwards N, and now you will too. And on a certain level, I appreciate seeing cars on the road that actually do look different, because for the past 20 years at least, mass market cars have been incredibly uninteresting to look at, in my opinion, and they never evoked a strong sense of contemporary context or identity. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm totally on board with like the future feigning EVs either. I think the body designs can often be over the top and kind of garish, especially when they include illuminated logos, which are just tacky. That's kind of like getting a tattoo of a corporate mascot with zero irony. Also, if a lot of different brands continue to flood the market with Tomorrowland cars, they're going to stop standing out at a certain point. It'll just be the new normal. But exteriors are only one way for cars to self-market. The interior of a car, as well as the experience of driving the car, can also perform a marketing function. So there's a marketing saying, that I've mostly forgotten, but that's not going to stop me from paraphrasing it. Basically, it says that a large portion of advertising and marketing is not to attract new customers, but to reaffirm purchase satisfaction with their existing customers and inspire some kind of brand loyalty. And that is why when you see a fun commercial for a thing you already bought, you wait for it to show a certain color before saying, oh, I have that one, to an empty room and maybe a confused cat. I do think that a car's interior is meant to reaffirm the driver's purpose. Oh, I do think that a car's interior is meant to reaffirm the driver's purchase, but only for as long as the car still feels sufficiently new. And in most cases, that period will not last very long at all, which is also by design. But there will be plenty of talk about interiors later on. I'm getting to something about that. But let's move right along to how the actual experience of driving can make for highly effective car self-marketing that really does boost brand loyalty. It might even inspire like a whole new hobby or involvement in car culture, but that's a more complicated subject coming up soon. There's a lot still to come, folks. Keep it tuned in. This is going to get a bit abstract, but I do think it's relevant. I've wanted to understand the headspace of driving for a while now, since I think that it's unique to pretty much anything else out there. Driving seems to support a very specific kind of thinking, and the best clue I've gotten so far came from a research study that was mentioned in Carjacked. Should we just stop? So this was a study of road rage. Why does driving seem to make so many people really angry, even people who might otherwise be really nice if they weren't in a car when a certain thing happened? I'm paraphrasing, of course, but the researchers found that when driving, people perceive the car as part of themselves, as an extension of their physical selves. And so when they perceived a threat to their car selves or like some kind of disrespect, they felt it very personally, kind of like someone had just walked up to them on the street and slapped them, swore at them, something like that. And so they would respond in an angry and defensive way, feeling personally violated. It's a really compelling explanation of road rage, but that idea of the car self is just as relevant to the positive aspects of driving. It also strengthens the norms of identifying with your car on a personal level, but that's getting off track again. Sorry, I was writing this part very late at night. So let's say you just bought a nice new car. You've never been that big on driving before, but you're doing more of it just because you can. And it feels good. It's a comfortable ride. You've got your playlists ready to go, and the performance of this car is better than anything you've had before. Well, given that perception of the car self, the distinction between, what the car is doing and what you are doing personally inside of the car really starts to blur. So in a weird way, it could start to feel like you are the one who's really fast. You are the one with a really loud exhaust note. You can pull away from everyone else at the red light because you are better than them. All of this stuff makes for incredibly positive associations with the car, and it turns that car into a voice that says, yes, this purchase was worth it. Specific instances of car self-marketing depend so much on just your individual tastes and interests, but I think it would be hard to argue that it doesn't happen at all on a large scale. And if you're really on the hook when it comes to cars, you're into car culture and maybe even car collecting, then car self-marketing could be happening basically at all times. Plenty of gearheads will talk openly about the other cars that they want, despite already having one that they really wanted in the past and that they probably worked really hard to get. There's always another car that's just out of reach, either because of cost, rarity, or fiddly things like import restrictions. And depending on your taste, even a brand new model could add to your list of what you would actually get if you had Jay Leno money. By the way, while I was working on this video, I saw Jay Leno driving around up here in Burbank. It's not an interesting story, but he was either in this car or this car. I don't know. That would have been a good interview for the video, huh? How do you think that guy feels about car marketing? And my last bit of evidence that cars are capable of being marketing channels themselves is the frequency of ads being slapped onto cars. There's even been talk of integrating cars into digital license plates so you could earn some kind of pittance by forcing the car behind you to get distracted by an ad for an accident lawyer, probably. So if direct marketing is marketing directly supported by auto brands, then indirect marketing is everything else. It's aspects of cars and their integration into different areas of our lives that don't have the direct involvement of auto brands or advertisers. And to give a quick preview of things to come, cars have some of the most intense and widespread indirect marketing of any product category. Let's talk about some of that. For one, there's music about cars. Cars and driving have been popular subjects or even just metaphors in songwriting basically since the car first became a commercial product back in the early 20th century, which I think is evidenced by this Henry Ford Museum exhibition of historic sheet music, which does look kind of interesting. But car music seems to have accelerated since the 1950s. I gathered just a few online lists of what people consider to be the best car songs, and that specifically means songs about cars, not just songs that sound good in cars. That's a whole other category. This list over here is from AAA, a major car insurance provider in the States, and it includes this little disclaimer at the end to discourage music and playlist distraction while you're driving, which is just kind of a fun, lighthearted reminder that choosing a song on your phone while behind the wheel could get you killed. Kind of puts a damper on the list, though, if I'm being honest. There is an entire Wikipedia article dedicated to car songs with a pretty extensive list of examples, and this caught my eye towards the bottom. See also Teenage Tragedy Song. There's a separate Wikipedia article for that, don't worry, and it actually provides a nice amount of context about how car crash songs were a response to the rising rates of car crash deaths in the 50s and 60s, and not just in the US. Now, of course, car crash songs have stretched all the way into the contemporary era as well, with even good old Billie Eilish recording a pretty gut-wrenching song about a friend who got into a crash. The existence of car crash songs as like a recognized subgenre of music is fascinating in itself. And in a way, it contributes to the broader genre of car music that marks cars as a significant cultural obsession, but it also acknowledges an extremely common aspect of driving that forms of direct car marketing never discuss overtly. You can guess why. And meanwhile, car songs that are generally positive about the driving experience contribute to the mythology surrounding cars, car ownership, and driving based on the cultural permeation of each song, meaning whenever a car song happens to reach listeners, it reinforces many of the positive associations that we've developed collectively over time. There are also instances where car-centric media will converge, it creates a kind of feedback loop of car worship. A racing game might include some car songs. A car movie is likely to include some famous car songs. Or a racing game with car songs might also feature a cameo from an actor who's famous for being in car movies.
I got you here in one piece.
Okay, should I even bother talking about car toys? I think I have to. I'm just in too deep now. So there are definitely adult car toys, not that kind, like scale models, but car-related toys are usually targeted towards children. And I'm glad I did some research because I didn't realize quite how extensive this category has become. Hot Wheels and like little die-cast cars are some of the more obvious examples of car toys for kids. And of course, those lines include both fictional and real-world cars. But then there are RC cars of various styles and sizes, a category that I think has also expanded quite a bit into adult markets. There's licensed merchandise for car-focused entertainment IP. Pixar's Cars still has to be the biggest around. There are these weird generic light-up cars that aren't models of anything, and they're not RC cars. I guess it's just supposed to have like the baby toy appeal of lighting up and making sounds. And the most insidious car toys to me are the motorized rideable cars that normalize a desire to drive extremely early on. And that is how car toys function generally. They work as car marketing for the youngins, regardless of whether they are intended to serve that function. And this might sound a bit surprising, but there can also be marketing for an entire product category that doesn't need to be brand specific or even based in reality. So let's say there's a goofy rideable car toy that's supposed to look like a flying car from the year 2203. That car doesn't serve a marketing role for any real world brand or model in particular, but it does still establish that cars overall are cool and fun and desirable. So when the kids who grew up with that toy are in a position to get a real car later on, they can easily transfer that childhood enthusiasm, consciously or subconsciously, to the products that are currently on offer and, in their price range. And again, none of this implies some kind of conspiracy. When a product reaches a certain threshold of normalization, a threshold that's ultimately enabled by and in alignment with how profitable it is, people who aren't involved with the manufacture or marketing of that product in any way will still end up perpetuating the presence, the promotion, and the proliferation of that product. When a snowball gets to a certain size, it's going to roll down the hill by itself. It doesn't need any help, and it's probably going to scoop up a St. Bernard dog on the way down. Okay, so I just had to address kind of gearheads, car social media content, the car community for just a second. Do car enthusiasts unintentionally market cars in the process of just really enjoying cars? Yes, they do, and it's something to be aware of, but I'm not going to go in on the gearheads. For one, I'm not a member of the community, so it would be pretty out of line for me to really criticize. And at the same time, I've been to enough drives and meetups and car shows to know that this community really does care. There can definitely still be elitism and brand worship, the same as any consumption community. But ultimately, people are showing up because they want to talk and they want to share. And when people say that they love their car, the company history can be a part of that. The history of the model can be a part of that. The brand mystique, which is definitely a form of marketing, can be a part of that too. But if we're talking about a car that someone has had and worked on for a really long time, that car isn't just a factory-made product anymore. Now that product has become part of a relationship of some kind. And whether it's been modded or just repaired and maintained for years on end, that specific car now has a story that's unique to any other. And this extends to car content on social media. There is still the hyper sterile sponsored content that very gently reviews new models and accessories and things like that. But there's also the very practical, useful, and even funny content that helps people keep their cars on the road instead of buying a brand new one. Or maybe it just communicates something interesting about cars and their histories. And to be honest, I don't think the marketing that car culture might do is all that dangerous. If anything, I think evangelical car enthusiasts are just as likely to encourage someone to buy a used car as much as a new one. And that's some kind of progress. That's some kind of positive. And keeping an old car running instead of sending it to the junk pile is always a good thing, as long as you can afford it. So yes, fawning over cars can do some marketing damage, but in the light of everything else, it's the least of my concerns. And the point of spending so much time describing these different kinds of direct and indirect marketing and these ways that cars have maintained an extremely consistent presence in our lives is to emphasize just how cloudy this whole subject really is. If each of us has had any experience with or exposure to cars, then we can't look at cars with any real objectivity. Part of that cloudiness comes from our own personal experiences and associations. Part of it comes from deliberate efforts of auto manufacturers and their marketing teams, and part comes from unintentional, indirect promotion of cars that, while they're not traditional forms of marketing, do benefit auto manufacturers and the perception of their products anyway. Just in case I haven't used enough bad analogies yet, our collective understanding of cars isn't far off from the experience of walking down Main Street, USA at Disney World. Everything looks really natural and beautiful and appealing, and its job is to be as convincing as possible. But of course, every last detail is essentially fake, or at least very carefully orchestrated. And on top of perspective tricks and props and fake scents, the place is also meant to play on shared conceptions of what small-town America used to look and feel like. Everything we think or feel about cars may seem simple, like it's coming from inside, but really those thoughts and those feelings have been filtered and colored many times over by many different sources. And that's not always a bad thing. From a certain perspective, that's an important part of being a person. But trusting those thoughts and feelings implicitly can be bad if it leads us to make bad decisions that have a good chance of resulting in negative consequences for ourselves or for others. And unfortunately, cars are lousy with negative consequences. We've made it to the part of the video where I try to compare the norms of car marketing to reality. There's a gap between car marketing and the realities of buying, owning, and driving a car. No one is surprised by this. I think there's a general expectation that marketing is almost supposed to be wildly inaccurate. Marketing is impressionistic. I think that's a good word for it. It offers ideas about what owning a product or using a service could be like, or how it might feel, more than how things will actually be. But I also don't think that that's an excuse, and I don't think that we should accept that borderline deceptive, blatantly manipulative marketing as the norm, just out of some monumental, multi-generational complacency. Let's respect ourselves a little bit here. And I think I've been attracted to topics like military marketing and car marketing because even in comparison to the norms of the global marketing industry, the gaps between marketing and reality in these categories are incredibly vast, wide enough to attract attention and maybe even inspire concern. So this is another aspect of the conversation that I think we can and should argue about, but especially while researching for this video, I've started to feel that marketing and advertising so far removed from reality might constitute some form of misinformation. It's basically an ethical question rather than a legal one. I don't have any fantasies about there being laws on the books that protect, buyers, customers, viewers, whatever, from wildly optimistic car commercials. But from an ethical perspective, is marketing that obscures more than it informs acceptable? And it still takes two to tango. There's always going to be a mix of brand responsibility and buyer responsibility. If a puppy farm describes a vision of dog ownership that only focuses on the positives and it makes you feel like, oh, it's only going to be good stuff guaranteed all the time, when someone buys a dog based on that sales pitch, they're absolutely still responsible for that purchase. They're liable. They're complacent in that decision, absolutely. But at the same time, would you really trust that place? Would you trust the puppy farm? Would you tell your friends to go there? Or would you maybe recommend going to a shelter where they give a much more accurate representation of what ownership is actually going to be like? So for however long it takes, and however long my voice keeps up, I'm going to look at the key concepts that are stated, suggested, or implied by direct and indirect car marketing and compare them as best I can against real life. I'll add some tidbits from personal experience here and there just for the sake of anecdotal flavor, but statistics are the bread and butter here, facts, data, anything I could find that was actually relevant to the subject matter. And just to give one last warning, this does get dark. I think it's worth sharing, or else I wouldn't be spending a very, very long time putting together this video. But if you feel like this could cause some pretty severe anxiety, maybe step away. And with that, we're ready to go. While car ads and other forms of car marketing show a variety of driving experiences in terms of like settings and specific content, all of these driving experiences are likely to be overwhelmingly positive. It's kind of a sure thing. And it really does seem pretty basic, show people enjoying your very expensive product. But as we're going to keep coming back to, the extent to which this aligns with reality is really questionable at best. So how impactful is that? And how relevant? Do people actually enjoy driving? The only reliable seeming survey I found was specific to the US. I think it was around 2006, and just under 70% of those surveyed said that they did enjoy driving. That's a pretty high number, and it does sound reasonable, but obviously it also means that about 30% don't. Then we have to account for the more intensely negative driving experiences, not just talking about a regular day out driving, doing chores and stuff where nothing crazy is happening. I did touch on road rage a while back, and I'm going to touch on it again here. A survey from an insurance site called The Zebra showed that 92% of respondents had witnessed an act of road rage in the past year. In 2019, it was reported that road rage and aggressive driving are increasing generally, with an observed 500% increase in car crashes relating to aggressive driving over a 10-year period. Another source claims that in 2022, someone was shot and killed in a road rage incident every 16 hours. I would call road rage, aggressive driving, and murder all different types of intensely negative driving experiences that sit at the opposite end of driving for fun, and obviously they are very common. And another very important element of how the driving experience is portrayed in commercials is traffic, or rather the lack of it. Credit to Carjacked for getting me to focus on this specific detail. You're not going to see traffic in a car ad. There are some, like I saw one the other day, that showed a very adorable depiction of traffic, where I think it was literally 6 cars total, but of course the smart protagonist driver in his fancy new car with voice commands for some reason is able to drive around these cars. But again, it's usually in the context of, oh, you can get out of this. Don't worry, you and your fancy new car don't have to worry about traffic ever because of XYZ feature. But this lack of traffic in car ads is definitely worth harping on, I think, because that's a really significant choice. And while your mileage may vary, anyone who doesn't live in like a rural area is going to spend a substantial amount of their drive time in traffic or some form of congestion. Traffic has been covered a whole lot on YouTube in recent years, largely because it's a central talking point for the self-designated spokespeople of the urbanist movement, I guess. And those videos are good resources. I'll put some of them on the screen here in case you want to take a look. And given all that coverage, I'll try to keep the traffic talk pretty minimal. So even back in 2010, when Carjacked was published, the concept of a literal rush hour, meaning 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening when people are going to or coming from very normal 9-to-5 jobs, that concept was a misnomer even then. At that point, so-called rush hour lasted around 6 hours each day on weekdays. The book also noted that here in LA, roughly 12 hours of each day are congested. And of course, traffic doesn't always mean completely deadlocked bumper-to-bumper traffic.
Bumper-to-bumper?
But it does mean pretty big slowdowns, inflated travel times, increased emissions, and frustration, anger, or even hate for the drivers who are stuck in it. And as the anti-car YouTubers have talked about many times over, road and highway expansion does not and has not improved traffic conditions in the long term. Instead, it tends to generate even more traffic. And so then, instead of just 4 lanes of traffic, you've now got 6 lanes. So I guess technically that means that traffic itself has improved in terms of being traffic-y. Good news for the traffic itself, which I'm imagining as a Captain Planet villain, but bad news for all of us who need to get places. And when populations continue to grow, and when a large percentage of those populations choose to drive, traffic only becomes a more pressing issue. And while there are certain cities that have slightly less traffic and congestion now than before the pandemic, many other cities have experienced net increases in congestion. So when car ads make breezy, traffic-free driving seem like the norm, they are willfully ignoring reality to encourage people, even the ones who don't like driving, to think of the car as a positive aspect of their day-to-day routine. And from a marketing standpoint, addressing traffic in some way, or at least acknowledging its existence, seems like it could actually be to the advantage of advertisers and manufacturers, specifically for the promotion of those in-vehicle entertainment systems that we're going to come back to soon. Apparently, it's just seen as too much of a risk. The ads that address traffic and many other negative aspects of driving are actually the ones that aren't advertising cars. They just involve them in some way. Portraying driving as an endless joy is obviously detached from reality, even for the people who enjoy driving more than anything else. Marketing is banking on this universal assumption that driving around places instead of walking there or taking the train or even staying at home is one of life's great pleasures. It's not, truth be told, but because so many people are forced into frequent driving by infrastructural car dependency, it's to the brand's benefit that they pretend that this is actually a good thing. And for them, it is. Car ads really love to show off entertainment features, or rather infotainment features, as they tend to be called, since they usually include utilities as well, basic features of the car and not just music, etc. These features have become synonymous with flashy new models. When stepping into a brand new car, you kind of expect the dashboard and the controls to look really good, even in models that occupy the lower price brackets. And I expect that that's tied to our tech product training as well. New tech needs to be visibly more appealing than the previous versions, even if its guts are largely the same. And this is pure speculation, but just as with modern smartphones and computers, expressing a lack of interest in the new thing immediately makes you look like a reactionary weirdo. And that ambient peer pressure, I think, extends to car shopping. A model with a really big capacitive screen is much more appealing than one with a really small resistive touchscreen, or one without a screen at all. And even the aesthetic qualities of the car's infotainment system, which obviously have very little to do with its features, need to align with contemporary tastes. And of course, the big irony of designing an infotainment system and controls that look and feel as modern as possible is that anything that feels really modern and new is going to feel old and outdated very quickly, much faster than the less trendy alternatives. And that might sound like a failure of these design elements, but for manufacturers, it's not at all. They want you to want the next one as soon as just a few months after you buy one car. It's to their benefit if you start to get tired of tech that is not as fresh as it could be. And we already know that that is the fate of literally all consumer tech. It will always be surpassed, and probably very soon, even if only in terms of its aesthetic qualities. All vehicle infotainment systems are hyper-disposable. Any given system is designed to become less desirable, and eventually it will probably become e-waste. This is more of my personal observation, but for as much effort as manufacturers are putting into researching and developing the systems, and they really are putting a lot into it, the long-term reliability and repairability do not appear to be major design goals. Because beyond the rapid decline of the appeal of these systems, the components themselves do not have especially long lifespans. And many components of these systems are brand or even model specific, so generic replacements can be difficult or impossible to find. Also, as we've all been taught by our phones, our computers, and our tablets, products based around proprietary software that the user doesn't have full control of can make repair a hassle at best and a marathon of frustration at worst. And this is indeed a common concern that has come with the advent of modern cars that rely more and more heavily on software. Manufacturers, at least so far, don't really allow independent car shops to access or alter a car's software. This makes cars with a software issue specifically much harder to service. So at least for now, your only option is to visit an official service center, and since the manufacturer is the only legitimate source of repair, they can set prices however they want to. Complex infotainment systems also create more points of failure for the car overall, and those points of failure are not necessarily limited to the nice-to-have entertainment features. These in-vehicle networks can absolutely affect other systems, and I've got a bit of a story for you on this one. Okay, so I've owned 2 cars in my whole life, and the car that caused me the most grief and that eventually died on me when I was on the road was a 2007 Nissan Altima. It was actually an SE. It was a special edition for the time, very fancy. I bought it in 2018, so it was already aging mechanically, but even worse than that, the original owner had dressed it up with lots of factory upgrades. There was a V6 engine, which didn't make much of a difference. There was a built-in navigation system, and those were still relatively rare at the time. There was a touchscreen head unit and a supposedly decent Bose sound system with this massive amp mounted in the trunk. So for the first couple of months I was into it, I felt like I'd really gotten a deal, and I felt like I was driving a nice car. But over the next 2 years, almost all of those components started to fail and cause pretty serious problems. Now, I expected the mechanics to wear. That just makes sense. You need to prepare for that with an older car. But the electronics were so much worse. So first the speakers went, meaning like the speaker cones themselves, and that's when cones were still commonly made out of paper, so almost all of them just tore. Most notably the sub speakers, which just sounded like trash at any volume, and I wasn't pushing the system at all. So that was a minor inconvenience, but I found some workarounds, but it only got worse from there. So basically the car battery started dying when the car sat unused for around 5 days, maybe a week. So I called AAA, I got it jumped, and I figured that everything was fine. When it died again, I shelled out for a new battery, which, you know, even with like a AAA discount and a cheap battery, it's still a couple $100. But since I was working from home at that time, and still am, I guess, I didn't need to take that car out every day, and soon enough the battery would just be completely dead if I let the car sit for only 2 or 3 days. And eventually it would struggle to start if it had only been sitting out overnight, which was really hard to avoid. The battery was under warranty, so I swapped it for a new one 2 or 3 times because the same thing happened with every single one, despite the techs finding nothing wrong with the actual batteries. As it turned out, the actual problem was a parasitic drain or a parasitic draw, which is when one or more of the car's electrical systems is pulling charge from the battery when it shouldn't be, like when the car is completely turned off. Certain types of parasitic drains are pretty easy to check for. Your headlights, for instance, if you see the headlights on, they're draining the battery, you can turn them off. Same thing with interior lights in the trunk or on the insides of the doors. But a drain that's caused by maybe like an infotainment system is a lot harder to confirm because it might be pulling charge even if you don't see the screen turned on or something like that. So to even find the source of the problem, what you need to do is get a diagram of the car's fuse boxes, and then you need to go into those fuse boxes, pull them one by one, and see how that affects the amount of current being drawn from the battery. And when they're all in place, you can see, oh, how much is being drawn. If it's a really small amount, you're fine. The battery will last a long time. If it's significantly more, oh no, there's some kind of drain. You can have a shop do this too, but it's pretty time consuming, so you can expect to pay a good amount of money for it. In my case, I tried it multiple times myself with a little multimeter that I bought, but I also let a shop try it too. The only change I saw came from pulling the fuse for the infotainment system. So I left it out. You know, the battery didn't drain, but I also found it really frustrating to try to do longer drives without any kind of music or radio. So I would just put my phone in the cup holder as a substitute, which was not great. When I took it to the shop, they said, I don't know. They said we can't find anything, but there's probably a drain because the battery keeps dying. It was just a horrible, horrible cycle. And this went on for more than a year. The shop was really happy to charge me for other mechanical repair work, and like that made sense to me. I understood why some of the mechanics needed to be repaired or replaced. I got that. And in the meantime, I was pulling fuses when I got out of the car, putting them back in when I wanted to drive somewhere. I even tried disconnecting and reconnecting the amplifier that was mounted in the trunk, hoping that that was the real issue. At one point, I took a tip from the internet and just disconnected one of the battery leads every time I turned the car off, which was pretty inconvenient since with the battery disconnected, the key fob wouldn't function to lock or unlock it. So what I ended up doing was, okay, it sounds like a lot now, and it was. I would manually lock 3 of the doors, but the rear door on the right side, I would leave unlocked, hoping no one would break into the car by finding the one unlocked door. I would come back to it, open that door, lean to the front to open the driver's side door, go in there to pull the hood release, connect the battery again, hopefully start the car up, and then the reverse of that when parking the car at the end of the day. And I couldn't even use the physical key that I got from the used car dealership. And, you know, this stuff was happening on top of around $2,000 worth of repairs over the course of a single year, just to keep that car, you know, functional and on the road. Stuff like the alternator, brakes, engine mounts, all of which were starting to go since the car had over 130,000 miles and was well over 10 years old. Finally, the engine literally blew a gasket, and it just completely died on me when I was first in line at a major intersection. For anyone who lives out here, it was Sunset in La Brea. There's a Starbucks there. Zonku Chicken, maybe? I should know. I was stranded in that parking lot for about 4 hours. It was the worst feeling. It was like, okay, light screen, time to go. And I just pressed the accelerator, and nothing. Just no noise, no resistance. It was so bad. The engine gasket fix would have cost around $1,200, and to be honest, I just didn't have the money. I didn't have the money, and even if I could have put it together, I wouldn't have been willing to put it up. I was just completely fed up with the whole thing, and I had spent so much money that I needed for other things on this car. All of it wasted, of course. So the money part of it is a separate topic that I'm going to come back to, but my point here is that the infotainment system, more than anything else, gave me more grief than any other problem I've ever had with any car, and it highlights the gap between mechanical and electrical or digital repairs. Mechanical repairs can be extremely expensive, but they're also very straightforward. Even the consequences are straightforward. You can decide which repair to prioritize based on how important it is for keeping the car running. But the infotainment stuff is in a completely other category. And this was the first time a shop with really incredible reviews, by the way, I'm not going to name them, they told me they just couldn't help after a certain point. There were plenty of times where I reached out to my car buddy who does a bunch of rally racing on the weekends, and he basically had the same response. It sucks, but these things are really hard to solve. And just in case you think I'm completely crazy and just missed some really obvious solution, or, you know, I was going to the worst shop in the world, I've looked at the forums, and this kind of stuff is not uncommon at all, across a lot of different brands, by the way, ranging from cars that are roughly the same age that mine was, all the way up to luxury models that are just 1 or 2 years old. I'm not going to say that every infotainment system is destined to fail in the same way or destined to fail at all, but I do expect that a lot of them will. Maybe this is a reach, but how long have you had your current computer? And how long after you bought it did it start to lag or come up with, you know, some frustrating issues? And how long do you expect you'll be able to keep using it before it just completely gives up the ghost or becomes too frustrating to use on a daily basis? Consumer tech lives fast and dies hard, and brand new models with flashy infotainment systems are far from immune from this same life cycle. The only real antidote to eventual infotainment failure is to have so much money that you can regularly purchase brand new cars and foist the problem onto somebody else. But as you might be able to guess, I don't actually think that's a good solution in the grand scheme of things. For one, buying a new car has a massive environmental impact, regardless of whether it's an EV or not. But getting rid of a recent model in favor of a new one puts someone else who only has enough money for a used car in an inconvenient, frustrating, and expensive position. And those decisions start with the manufacturers. Investing so heavily in infotainment for new models across all price points is inherently a short-term investment. So when you see an ad flaunting the slickest car entertainment system you've ever seen, it's worth wondering how quickly it's going to look old, run terribly, or fail completely. 6 seconds left on the recording. Nice. Affordability is definitely not one of the look at this categories I was talking about earlier. I have not seen car marketing explicitly claim that cars are affordable. Instead, car ads tend to boost the impression of affordability by focusing on just one small portion of car ownership expense, the monthly payment. In fact, even car dealers are sometimes instructed to focus the customer's attention on the monthly payment they're capable of making rather than total costs. One amusing and miserable anecdote from Carjacked mentions dealers who ask that same question. They get a response from the customer and then they say, "Oh, okay, and up to?" essentially making their estimate a minimum and encouraging a much higher budget, which is pretty irresponsible, I think.
The special was $299 a month. Deshaun, how did the price go to $400 a month? Post-marketing, the whole purpose is to get you to stop what you're doing and come into the dealership. But what you're doing is you're putting yourself in a position to do battle with someone who negotiates every day for a living.
It is extremely rare for a car commercial to list the total purchase price of a car, but you usually won't see an actual MSRP. Similarly, a lot of recent ads for like car loan services almost exclusively focus on how you can choose your loan based on your choice of a monthly payment slider. They love the slider. That's like apparently supposed to be the most empowering thing in the world. But of course, your monthly car payment is just a fraction of what it's actually going to cost to own/lease and then drive a car from month to month. And it's definitely a vital part of car ownership or leasing, since just one missed payment can very quickly get your car repossessed, which is terrifying. But, you know, gas is also important. Charging fees, if it's an EV, insurance, registration, and taxes, which can take various forms. And keep in mind that the gas taxes in the US are extremely low compared to other OECD member countries. I checked the numbers. According to the US government, the average annual cost of car ownership and operation was more than $12,000 in 2023. So easy math, roughly $1,000 a month on average. And that number has been steadily increasing. For some perspective, the average monthly housing costs in the US are just over $2,000. So one takeaway is that the monthly payment that receives so much marketing attention is a significant chunk, but still just a chunk of monthly car expenses. For conservative budgeting, you should actually plan to pay around double the car's monthly payment when you include other monthly expenses. And the bigger picture takeaway is that owning and driving a car is expensive, period. And it's getting more expensive pretty much constantly. And that comparison to housing costs is especially shocking to me, since housing prices in the US and many other parts of the world have been notoriously out of control, much higher than they need to be, and there's not a lot of help so far in terms of limiting those costs. And rightly so, the rising housing costs have spurred lots of blowback. And I don't think that it's like politically orchestrated. I think it's been a lot of grassroots response of people just saying, look, I can't afford to live even in a basic place, even though I'm working full time, and that's a problem. But in contrast, I haven't seen a similar response to car costs. At least so far, it's possibly happening somewhere, and I'm just not aware of it, but I don't think it's anywhere near the level of the response to housing prices. And I think part of that lack of frustration, or lack of vocal opposition, I should say, has to do with the normalization of car ownership and spending a bunch of money for it. I think a lot of us just see that as part of being an adult, something you just have to deal with as part of, you know, having a job, renting a place to live, etc.
Coming to bed, honey?
One of the sources that I used for this section includes a few internet forum comments regarding typical car costs. I guess they were just trying to offer some opinions from regular folks, and it worked out because these are really useful to me. And in particular, one of these comments provides a really nice summary of some of the key assumptions that people make when they're stuck in the headspace of, oh, I have to have a car, I have to have a car. It costs a lot, but it sucks, but I have to have a car. I'm not trying to call them out at all, no username, don't worry about that. But I think these are really common assumptions, and I also admit that these are assumptions I used to make myself, 100%. So here's the comment in full. I live in a very car-centric area, so not owning a car is impossible. I paid my car off in 2018, and my husband does my maintenance for me, so it's not too bad. However, gas prices are hovering under $7 where I live, and it's bonkers that my small car takes $60 to fill up. Remote work has made this so much better for me. Previously, I was spending $200 to $250 a month on gas alone to and from work. Now I'm only paying $60 a month on gas. If I had an option for public transit, I'd take it. It does exist here, but it's unreliable. So first of all, this person is apparently in a pretty good position when it comes to monthly car costs. They don't have a monthly payment anymore, and I guess that their husband does some basic maintenance for like oil changes. I doubt he's equipped for bigger repairs, but we'll just forget that for now. For one, this commenter doesn't mention car insurance premiums at all, which even at bare minimum, I think would be at least $60 or more or more each month, equal to or greater than their decreased gas spending. So already they're omitting a major cost for just the sake of highlighting gas prices, I guess. But on top of that, as Carjacked points out really effectively, Americans griping about gas prices comes from a pretty underinformed perspective, because for decades now, the gas prices in the US have been artificially lowered thanks to some pretty extensive and pretty dubious military action over in the Middle East. So yes, $7 a gallon would definitely be relatively high for American gas historically, but that's also only because the US government has gone to some really great lengths, I don't mean great in a good way, to maintain favorable prices on oil and gas imports. Also, gas prices tend to receive much more attention from drivers because those gas prices are extremely visible when you're driving, and you also have to actively participate in that spending, right? You have to pick the gas station, kind of wince at the cost, you start filling it up, you see those numbers ticking up really, really fast, and it just seems miserable. Compare that to something so much more hands-off, like, you know, an automated payment for insurance premiums every single month. You probably don't even think about it. You maybe notice the money being withdrawn, and that's about it. You're not face to face with it all the time. So all of this contributes to a perception that gas prices are the real problem with car costs, when it's really just one piece of the puzzle. The other part of this comment that really struck me is the disparity in how public transportation is discussed. So I want to isolate these two statements. I live in a very car-centric area, so not owning a car is impossible, and public transit does exist here, but it's unreliable. Those are wildly different statements. A place where not owning a car would be impossible sounds like a place that just has zero public transit at all, and I would understand that. If you live in like a rural area, you have like an hour-long drive to work, there's no buses, there's no trains. What are you gonna do? You take a private plane, I guess, or you're like a world-class cyclist? There aren't a lot of options for you, I get it. And I do believe that the public transportation is unreliable wherever this person lives, because that's common in North America, for example. It's really unreliable here in LA. I probably complained about it earlier. And it's basically tradition for Angelinos who have never set foot on the metro to claim that the metro is trash. But there's a difference between unreliable and impossible. And by the way, car alternatives don't need to be all or nothing either. So this commenter doesn't consider a halfway approach. You know, what if you take the unreliable public transit just 1 or 2 days of the week and drive the rest of the time? I think that would be a pretty substantial reduction in those gas costs you hate so much. And again, I'm definitely talking to my past self here. At least in LA, I never would have taken the train when I still had a car. I had heard that it sucked really bad, so I just drove everywhere, and I got really mad when it cost a lot to fill up. The metro can be bad sometimes, but there are around 200,000 people who use it every single day, and I think their yearly ridership is like 62 million. So it appears to at least be functional in contributing to higher ridership for a public transit system at all. Also makes it that much more likely to receive increased public funding, so it's just a nice thing to do. Now the next step, the next level of removing yourself from the normalization of car ownership and higher car costs is to consider not owning a car. Carjacked has a great little section on very successful investors who either don't own a car or they just hang on to their old car for as long as possible, specifically because they realize that cars, especially brand new ones, are absolutely terrible investments. They depreciate so fast, and they start depreciating basically as soon as you drive them off the lot. And to the credit of that same article, it also includes a quote from another commenter who describes the savings of a car-free life. around $900 a month for this particular person, which seems right in line with those average monthly costs we talked about earlier, especially considering that even cheap public transit still costs something, especially if you're using it every day. In the modern world, I think there will always be people who really do need a car to live their lives, but I also think that there are lots of people who could very well live without one, but just haven't realized it yet because they just figure it's completely inconceivable. And just like me a couple of years ago, they probably haven't thought about it because they've lived their lives completely surrounded by direct and indirect car marketing, all of which insist that owning a car and paying through the nose for it for all of your adult life is the most natural thing in the world. And right now, it kind of is natural, but I don't think that means it needs to be. It's finally time to talk about safety. And to be clear, vehicle safety features are a good thing. The introduction and then the subsequent standardization of what we now consider to be really basic safety features like seat belts and anti-lock brakes had an extremely positive effect on driving safety. And I want to acknowledge that there are some really talented engineers doing their best at their jobs in order to make cars safer, and in turn, the marketing teams are then more than happy to tout the new safety features. And we definitely need a quick aside here, because ads for SUVs that focus on safety features are especially egregious given the frankly terrible safety threats that this class of vehicles presents, not just to the people inside of these cars, but to everyone outside of them as well. But now, looking past SUVs and that whole tangent, what is the problem with car ads focusing so much on safety, just in general, for all model types, all brands, whatever? Well, ads give what I would call a very strong impression that brand new cars with all these really flashy safety features, most of which are going to be, expensive upgrades on top of the base model, are going to keep you safe on the road without ever outright claiming that they're going to save your life. That would be egregious and probably illegal. But is that impression actually true? So in theory, safety features could keep you safe in specific scenarios, but the problem with making any sort of implications about car safety is the fact that driving itself, regardless of the model, year, type of car, and what features it has, is overwhelmingly unsafe. And, unsafe compared to what, you might ask? Well, statistically, it's unsafe compared to flying around in airplanes. It's unsafe compared to walking places, and it's unsafe compared to cycling. And moving now to the personal side of it, when we're trying to assure ourselves or other people of the safety of driving or flying or really anything else, it's very easy to default to inductive reasoning. So that's when you say something like, I've been driving all my life and I've never had any issues with it, never been in a crash, it's never been dangerous for me, therefore it'll probably be fine for you. I've done that sort of thing. I get why you would do that in a pinch, just to calm somebody down, maybe someone brand new to driving. I get it. But I think that repeating those kinds of ideas, those kinds of statements, it's a way of subtly convincing yourself, maybe even unintentionally, that your experience is representative of the way things are for everybody else. I understand not wanting to dwell on the safety risks of driving, but I'm also hoping that engaging with some of this safety talk might encourage some people to try out some car alternatives and potentially even just discourage the marketing-driven belief that shiny new safety features are some kind of magic bullet when it comes to staying safe in the event of a crash. And even when attempting that inductive reasoning that I was talking about earlier, just for myself, I feel like I haven't been able to convince myself that driving is actually safe for a really long time. And that's not just because I've been reading some statistics and things like that for this video. Like most of us, I've already heard plenty of horror stories from friends and family. I've even had some friends and family who became the horror stories. And I'm definitely lucky when it comes to this stuff. I've never been in any kind of crash, not even just a fender bender. But at the same time, I absolutely know plenty of people who have been in crashes, or I have friends and family who have just lost people in crashes. Or a really sad example that I remember from my childhood is my uncle, I remember, always used to make special trips to visit a buddy of his that he'd known since like high school. But this friend had gotten into a drunk driving crash a number of years ago, and after suffering really severe brain trauma, his functionality, everything was really limited. So he was basically confined to family care at home. And I don't know what really struck me, because I didn't know this guy before the crash. So people had to try to like explain how he used to be and like what kind of person he was, what his personality was, because he was just so different. Now it's just, the injuries just completely changed his life. So in terms of the hard numbers, they're not great. There are approximately 1 million road crash deaths globally every single year, and a report from the World Health Organization notes that the road traffic injuries were actually the leading cause of death for anyone between the ages of 15 and 29, 8th leading cause overall. And the safety risks of driving, as much as we maybe try to ignore them when we really need to drive, I do still think that most people are aware of them. And even the campaigning, I really do. I have some really vivid memories of being a high schooler and getting ready to drive at various stages, the classes and then the permit and then eventually the license testing and all that. There was some real effort put into just trying to educate us, just trying to explain to us kids, hey, this is actually really serious, dangerous. And those efforts really were extensive. So on the one hand, we had like the driver's ed class where they would show, the what do you even call them? The shock value tapes, the things that are just supposed to be so graphically violent that it, gets you to pay attention and take this stuff seriously. The one tape in particular I remember that they showed us was called Red Asphalt 3, which was supposedly kind of notorious in this space for being extra graphic. And there was this thing in high school, you can let me know in the comments if this was also something that happened at your school. So every other year, they would set aside an entire school day for a whole bunch of different activities and talks just surrounding driving safety, and specifically trying to talk about how awful drunk driving is. There would be like testimonials in the auditorium from either, teachers or like guest speakers who had direct experience with these kinds of crashes. And then the big sort of finale, feels wrong to call it that, but there's a big installation, I guess, in the parking lot where they would bring in wrecked cars. They would plop them down. They would set them up to be sort of a semi-realistic crash scene. And then a handful of students that we knew would act out the crash, or essentially be dead bodies there just hanging out. And then as an extra special touch, when that was done and we all went back inside, those students just got to go home. So I think we were supposed to really feel their absence. On paper, I think these kinds of safety demonstrations or educational activities and stuff being so ubiquitous really is a positive thing. I think they represent a lot of effort going towards the promotion of driving safety. But again, if you've experienced this stuff, you also know that roughly 0 students do take them seriously, unless maybe they've had personal experiences with a crash and its many after effects. And maybe that's what should be focused on a bit more, because those after effects are absolutely worth mentioning on their own, since an initial injury or even just, a survival of a crash can absolutely have life-changing effects So while the number of road crash deaths is about 1 million people per year, the injuries are about 50 million. And in turn, those injuries can have really serious health complications. There are some varying estimates on the number of people involved in crashes who end up developing PTSD. One estimate said around 40%, another one guesses an average of around 22%. But regardless, given the number of crashes, given the number of injuries around the world any given year, that is a huge number of people developing PTSD. And apparently this is also the single biggest source for people developing PTSD who are not active members of the military. There are also experts and researchers who have guessed that the reported numbers of road crash deaths and injuries are actually a bit low because the stats don't carry through after people leave the hospital. So if somebody's injured in a crash, receive some amount of medical treatment, but then end up dying of complications a few weeks later, a few months later, it's not recorded. So on top of how horrifying the statistics already are, there's a very good chance they're even worse than we know. And I think I need to stop there. For my own well-being and yours. There's so much more. We could spend the entire video on this subject, but I also don't think that that's necessary. If you drive at all, then driving is probably one of the most dangerous things you do on a regular basis. And even if you don't drive, unfortunately, walking or cycling anywhere near cars is significantly dangerous, not because those activities are dangerous, but because the cars threaten your safety at any given moment. And bringing this back around to the ads and other forms of car marketing, all of these safety issues, all of these very real risks that someone takes on whenever they get in a car are in spite of all those wonderful safety features that are being touted all the time. Yes, the safety features are good. Safety should absolutely be a priority when you're shopping for a car, whether it's used or new. But I also don't think that you should just implicitly trust an ad or some other form of marketing to say, oh, that feature is going to be really safe. It's going to be really useful for me in particular. It really takes more than that. If you're talking with a salesperson, ask as many questions as possible. If they don't know the answers, look for more data online. It's about learning some more surrounding where those safety features are most useful, what types of driving are they going to be most impactful for, exactly how much money is it going to cost to get that feature installed in the first place, how much is it going to cost to repair if you do get into a crash and the thing goes off and has to be completely reset or replaced. And again, we should never just completely trust that, oh, well, I've been given the impression this car is safe. It's probably safe. I don't have to be so worried about being a distracted driver. I don't have to worry so much about other drivers not doing a good job on the road. For the foreseeable future, the driver is absolutely the most important part of the equation when it comes to safety. And keep in mind, the less you drive, the less risk you're taking on at all. And I'm not saying that to try to get you to stop leaving the house or stop driving completely. Like I said, a lot of people have to, and ultimately it's your decision. The car can feel like a protective space, and that often comes down to very specific design choices that are meant to deliver that result. And it's a feeling heavily supported by very expensive car marketing, but it's ultimately only a feeling, and it can become the exact opposite of that at any given second you're on the road. The last message very commonly found throughout car marketing that I want to discuss here is that a car can become almost like a family member, witnessing or even facilitating all these different major life moments, being a part of your memories. Now, in all honesty, this message, this tactic overall, it is manipulative. It's tugging at your heartstrings. It's triggering your own positive memories. It's using the pivotal moments of your life to try to get you to spend money or to feel good about a massive amount of money you've already spent. But I also wanted to talk about this messaging because I actually don't think it's inaccurate or even really misleading. I think it's a very practical realistic approach to selling an extremely expensive product. Now, the motivation behind it is definitely just as soulless as that of any other marketing, but getting sentimental with a car ad makes perfect sense. And that's because it's a technique that ties right back into the kind of overwhelming normalization and ubiquity of cars that has affected many parts of the world for well over 100 years. As I hopefully described earlier, I don't know, it's a really long script and there's been a lot of reshoots. That normalization and ubiquity is a cycle, and it's maybe even reciprocal at times. People who spend their weekends at car shows and drives and put on another coat of turtle wax almost every day aren't doing this stuff just because they saw a bunch of car commercials when they were young. It's not because they were somehow convinced that they actually love this hobby. Auto manufacturers aren't doing Truman Show style staging to make sure that teenage kids have memorable and fully consensual experiences in the fronts or the backs of their cars. Even entire countries can have very specific collective relationships with cars based on their histories and their cultural meta-narratives. I can only speak to the US's relationship with cars, but it really does run deep. The car as a concept, or even the car marketplace, scratches so many different American itches, from the overwhelming urge to buy stuff as often as possible, to a vast product range with nearly infinite potential for models and modifications that feel like they're just for you, that they fit your sense of identity, and that they help you live the life that you want to live. The function of the car speaks to the meta-narrative of rugged individualism and exceptionalism that pervades American media and its own telling of its history, I guess I'll say. And the country itself, stolen though it is, happens to be incredibly well suited for long car trips, and if you know what you're doing, even a beater can make the legendary cross-country road trip and show you places that don't tend to get attention any other way. As a college kid studying media, I guess, different kinds of media, it was a big moment to realize that a thing doesn't have to mean what its creator wanted it to mean. A thing can absorb new meaning, and not always for the better. It's very human to give something more value than it's really worth. Even something that's unreliable, overly expensive, and dangerous can also be friendly, reassuring, and lovable. And from that perspective, the absence of the car, either on a personal level or a cultural level, would be a real loss. It would mean the loss of this constant and vaguely positive presence in your life, almost like the loss of a family member. But as I was thinking about this, I found my answer. Framing car ownership, especially long-term car ownership, as a relationship, we should probably keep this in mind. Loving something doesn't mean being a slave to it. Even if you love your car, it shouldn't take up all of your thoughts or all of your time. You don't need to spend the last $12 in your account on a wash just to prove your devotion. You can even take a break from your car and see what life is like without it. And if that car is no longer in your life at all, you can still be happy. You can move on, and not being held down by a car, not being closed up in it, it could lead to new interactions, connections, and whole experiences that just weren't possible before. And the best part of this is that I think it can be applied to our collective relationship with cars too. If there comes a day when cars are no longer a good fit for modern society, and it's arguable we've gotten there already, wouldn't the healthiest option be to let cars go? Evolving doesn't devalue the good things that cars added to our lives. We don't have to settle for cars just because they're all we've ever known. It's possible, and maybe even natural, to look forward to something better just down the road, even if we don't know what it is yet. Even after all of the talking that I've done, I still have this worry that I haven't made my intentions quite clear enough. So just to sum up one last time, I don't feel that inaccurate or misleading marketing is something we should just accept, even if it is the standard. It's also not our job to work out how the marketing industry could act more responsibly. Though in the case of car marketing, I think the solutions are fairly obvious. Depict the realities of driving and car ownership, and then offer solutions if you see some of those realities as problems. Use real life to your advantage. Of course, the real fantasy is the total disappearance of marketing, where everyone could do their own research and make their own purchasing decisions with a minimum of brand influence. But I also don't really expect that to happen anytime soon. I also recognize that a lot of this video became about the car itself, just as a concept, as an entity. In a way, it would have been much better to avoid that generally, but the problem is it's impossible to talk about the marketing of a certain product without also talking about the product itself. And as I've tried to articulate, that's because our own thoughts, feelings, and opinions are all tangled up with a lifetime's worth of marketing influence. Separating the two is hard work, and the results are going to be different for everyone. And beyond my personal interest in car marketing, which I would gauge as pretty high, this is also a pivotal moment in the history of the car. There's a very good chance that car production that we see today just won't be possible anymore in, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, 50 years from now. And on top of those limitations, I think more and more people are realizing that cars are an extremely inefficient way to get around. And as always, I don't expect my video to be the final word on the topic, but I do want to add to the conversation, and talking into a camera in my room is a way for me to do that. And of course I have to say it. If you think that this video was all right, or even pretty good, please consider sharing it with somebody else. Also, I don't have a Patreon, but if you feel like these last 2 months worth of work produced something of value, you can donate to the channel using the Ko-fi coffee. You can use the Ko-fi coffee link in the description. No pressure, but the option's there. And that brings us to the end. I'll have some behind the scenes talk for the diehards in just a moment. But for everyone else, thank you so much, take care, and I'll see you in the next one. I think it's finally over. I mean, there's still more editing to do, obviously. And then the upload is going to be a whole process. The odds of triggering at least one copyright claim are pretty darn high. But I'm glad. I'm really glad I finally pushed myself to finish this particular project. And I'm so glad you've joined me for the whole thing. Just a couple of notes here at the end as usual. First of all, the reason this was the next video on the channel is because I promised it in the previous video. I know now that that was a mistake. It was just a mistake in terms of my scheduling. Like there are absolutely shorter videos I could have done and given you folks more to watch in the interim while I was working on this. I just should have kept it as a surprise. I should have kept the plans to myself. I was changing the script deep into shooting the video. I cut out a whole bunch of stuff in the editing process as well. It was just way too much again, and well, I don't want to repeat that side of it. I would like this to be, you know, a little bit healthier just for the longevity of the whole channel. The experience also showed me very clearly that I love doing this. Like, this is really fun. The motivation is really strong, and I just find it so interesting to write about, speak about, and the editing is its own little adventure. I'm in. I hope you are too. I will work as best as I can to do at least one video a month. That's the goal. But yes, if I haven't said it enough already, thank you. Just the greatest compliment in the world that anybody would actually sit down and watch this. Enormously flattering to me. I think that is it. I'm finally done talking. This is very exciting. I'm even going to go on a vacation after this. I'm just burnt out. Have a lovely start of your fall season. I'll be back as soon as I can. Bye.